All right, everyone, welcome to a Thursday edition of the MSP Initiative Live. Today's January 20th. I thought 2 seconds ago it was Christmas and New Year's, but time flies, especially when it's the NFL playoffs. So today we have two guys that have been in the sandbox for a while, right? In different places, different roles. We bring on Kevin Lancaster and Matt Solomon. We're going to talk to them a little bit about their story, and then we're going to hear about this new concoction, right? Like they're trying something different, and we're going to see what it exactly that different is, and maybe understand what's the different benefit to everyone for it. So without further ado, welcome, guys. Matt and Kevin are suckers like me. We live in the Northeast. A little bit of fun weather once we get into wintertime. So we're just talking about snow as we were jumping onto the call. How you doing, guys?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Awesome.
thank you very much.
Awesome. So just in case there's somebody that's going to watch this that hasn't run into one of you before, right? I mean, that should be rare, right? But let's just giggle for a second. You want to give them like a 30,000 foot overview, right? How did you get into the space? What did you do before now? And and then we'll get into the new stuff.
Kevin, why don't you start it, because I'm part of your journey. So
Oh, there you go. Fine, great. Yeah, so I've been in and around the channel for the last 20 odd years. I started consulting, IT consulting, government contract consulting firm back in 2003. And we ended up being the front door for companies like Palantir, a lot of these emerging innovative solutions. I take no credit for Palantir going public, but we were there. We picked them up at the airport in DC when they had their first DoD government meetings. But spent a lot of time scouting for different technologies that we could bring into the market. We were, again, consulting companies as well, helping them figure out how do they break into the government market. And then you realize we had a wealth of experience in channels and setting up government, public sector, private sector channels. And after about 8-9 years of finding all these great technologies and having them getting bought by Symantec, Oracle, Microsoft, kind of go through that churn, decided there's some really interesting technologies that we could look to potentially tech transfer out of government. There's some really interesting private sector technologies. And that was right around 2014 when kind of the brainchild of ID Agent and the flagship product there, Dark Web ID. And that was right around the time Mr. Solomon joined us with that consulting firm, Winvale. And as they say, the rest is history when it comes to ID Agent and all the fun things that we did with that. So why don't you take over, Matt? Tell us about you.
Yeah.
Matt.
Well, I've been in sales and marketing my whole career, but I found Kevin's consulting company, Winvale, through a headhunter. And about 8 months into it, he came to me with this idea of dark web monitoring, which I knew absolutely nothing about, but I know it sounded a hell of a lot more interesting than selling government consulting services. And so I just took a while. At the time, it was a big leap of faith. Not really knowing, where this was going to go. And at that time, we weren't even talking about the channel. And so, sacrifices were made. I even sold my car back then. I mean, I live in the city, but I was like biking to work and everything. And it's true,
like,
Kevin. I did.
I couldn't make ends meet.
Well, I knew it was going to take a while as a startup. And so I knew my commission checks weren't just going to roll in. So I did want to cut down costs, and I did sell my car. That's part of my origin story.
What kind of car was that, Matt? I mean, come on.
I mean, it was just a Nissan Altima, but like city, you think about like the cost of like parking in the city and all that. It saved me like $800 a month. So
that was right around when you started tooling around with those electric scooters, right? And you're like scootering or biking, electric bikes all over
So
the place.
I bought an electric bike, which was pretty sweet. But yeah, so I mean, I was the first employee with ID Agent, and I know a lot of people, hopefully in the channel, know that story. But just the quick synopsis: we went really from no partners to 2,000 in a 2-year period, and later got acquired by Kaseya, and both of us stayed on there for a good 2.5 years, or 2 to 2.5. And my main role was I was the product evangelist. I was the person on the road. That's why I got to know you and so many others, both on the vendor and on the MSP side.
Wow. So let me ask you a question, right? For people who, I mean, there's a lot of people who have either come from your side, right? They started something and then kind of went straight into channel vendor mode. Sometimes people have started something out of their MSP and then kind of morphed or grew something into a channel solution from a vendor standpoint. If you were to give advice to somebody who is starting something like that today, look, you guys just started a new venture, but let's say somebody is an MSP, they think they found something that hasn't been solved before, they want to build something new. What would be your advice to them, right? Because like, it's not, I mean, I think you guys you got really lucky, right? Things happen fast, right? But it doesn't always happen that way.
Mhm.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's, I think, the premise behind a lot of entrepreneurs, right? A lot of entrepreneurs get passionate about solving a specific problem. I think that's one of the pieces of advice, right? If you're not passionate about it, then you may not want to spend the time and effort and energy going after it. And that was one of the things that we were really passionate about with the dark web side, the credentials. This was early on. This was pre a lot of the big salacious data breaches that were out there, but we knew there was a massive problem, and it was further demonstrated by what 3 months after we launched dark web ID, we won it's public, but the $20-30 million contract with OPM to help on the identity restoration, of the
amazing. So $30 million contract in literally 3 months in. I mean, wow.
Yeah, it was wild, and there are elements that we were able to really interesting elements of that program, right? One, we were providing identity monitoring to those who are impacted, but we were able to look across that entire population of individuals, government employees and retired government employees that had compromised data. I think the statistic we landed on was like 76% of the people that were enrolled at that point, and this is 2015, had some other compromised credential out there in the dark web that had nothing to do with
that's a crazy percentage
hacking. Yeah. And so you start to see that and you realize, gosh, I mean, our US government, our federal agencies, state and local agencies were absolutely porous because of, just human behavior and password reuse. And so that literally became our marching call or whatever, our message, like we want to have a meaningful impact on this issue. And over the years, right, you saw it play out. It became more of an issue. It still is an issue today. I mean, it's crazy. We're talking about password hygiene and reuse and all that stuff, 6-7 years on. But getting back to your question, right? If you're not passionate about it, then it's just a hobby. But if you're passionate about it, then it's an effort, worth pursuing.
So let me ask this question then, because it really, you can't do it by yourself, Kevin, right? I mean, God knows everybody who starts any business is like, it's they're going down with the ship, right? I mean, it's their baby, but that you got to convince people, right, to come on board and like want to do it, right? Not everybody's really motivated like you are in your own business. How do you get people to buy in? What's the trick? What's the magic?
Well, maybe that's a question for Matt, how I suckered him into these last 3 companies. But no, just real quick on that. It gets back to that. I think people understand that if you identify a problem or a challenge and you're really passionate about it, that stuff comes through. And that was great. Honestly, the great thing about Matt, early on and certainly with dark web ID is that like he understood. I mean, he was ridiculously passionate about it. He'd get up on stage, he'd kind of take a deep breath, and it was just like, Matt was all in, and we are on our mission of trying to, help and protect people. And that stuff comes through. And I think people understood it was absolutely genuine. And so as we're looking at this idea and really the next thing we want to tackle, next big challenge, kind of have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, is it worth it? Right? I mean, are we really motivated, invested really to try to solve this challenge? And so we got behind and really, picked a point in talking with the people that have joined us here recently. I mean, I think they get it. I think they understand the vision that we laid out. And, that's how successful companies scale, right? Everyone's marching forward with the same mission in mind. And where I'm just ridiculously thankful that, we're building an amazing team here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I noticed you brought a few new people on board. I think Caitlin and Robin just came on
Yeah.
board this week, I think.
Get my sign
Yeah.
back.
So, when you get onto the second venture, if you've had success, you can attract people based on, what they've seen before, right? You
Fair.
now have a track record. So
Fair.
that certainly helped. But I do think, like, when we're on the calls with the Caitlins, the Robins of the world, they hear our passion for it, right? They know the sacrifices we made and what we're putting into this. And so I think that's part of it. And, just kind of going back, piggybacking a little bit about kind of the original two questions there. And this is coming maybe not from the side of the first person who thought of the idea, because you mentioned, like, if you have an MSP who kind of comes up with that idea. But I also think it's, if you're someone out there who wants to be part of somebody else's journey, it's finding a mentor, or finding somebody you're connected with, and staying in their network. This is the third company that I'm working with Kevin, the first as a co-founder, though.
I'm sorry, Keith
I know.
Nelson is
I know.
hysterical. By the way, that story, Keith, is just like lives in the Hall of Fame as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. Okay. So you're co-founders, right? You're not, Matt, you're not working for Kevin this time. You're working together. And like, obviously you guys don't go in together if you don't have the success from the last one. I mean, but Matt, the first time you really, like you said, you went out on a ledge, right? You sold your car. You were trying to make it work, rub two sticks together. Like,
Yep.
what do we got to do? I just like, it was awesome that everything kind of clicked together for you guys in the last one in like this really, really aggressive window. I wish everything was like that. Unfortunately, the world sometimes doesn't work that fast.
I know, but I do want to add this part of the story, because I do think it's important, because everybody does see ID Agent as this overnight success. And in the channel, it was absolutely. But there was an 8 to 12 month period where our product, this is when we were solely focused on enterprise. There was a 3-month period where the product just wasn't even working properly. This was in the beginning development stages of it. I don't even know. I honestly, going back to those 3 months, I'm not sure what I was doing. I don't know how I was even trying to sell the product. It's like a blur to me. And part of it was also because I think I was like depressed going through it, because it was hard to go to work. And this is, I've told Kevin this story a million times, where I've said it got to a point where I was having a hard time getting out of bed. We were having such difficult times, and we were having meetings with the CIOs and CISOs of the biggest Fortune 500 companies you can imagine. And it was like hitting our heads against a wall. For some reason, they just didn't understand how credential exposures on the dark web were going to be a risk to their organization, or they just weren't listening. I don't know, but it
Common
really,
denominator, people. That's how it happens.
I guess so. But we did sign some really interesting enterprise companies, but it was not an easy path. And, we literally sat down one day and we're having a conversation. And then I honestly thought I was walking into a conversation where I was going to almost lose my job, because I was basically, I went in and said, this is not working. Like, whatever we're doing is not working. And then, we just, it's like, feels like you mentioned luck and stuff like that. And that absolutely plays part of it, because we had a conversation about, we talked about that MSP thing for a while ago. And he's like, all right, well, just go see what that's all about. And then, then our lives like just completely changed.
Okay,
So
go ahead, Kevin. I got another question loaded up, but go ahead.
I'll be quick, but what was really interesting about that, right, to Matt's point, that we sat down, I flew out and met with the CISOs and CIOs of like just about every state. I sat down with governors, I sat down with, different groups and intelligence agencies. And it was like, are we like on another planet? Like, or is this that bleeding edge? Like, do you not get it? And
so they literally didn't understand the concept at all.
I think there were two primary responses. One, it was, it was more of an indictment on that CIO or CISO that they, that it could even happen. Like, how could that happen? I've got this stuff on lockdown. So there's an element, maybe part ego. There's some contract timing and just the stuff that you deal with, the enterprise sales and stuff like that. But then there was other part, like, it's just, I don't get it. Like, but then you'd have these conversations, you literally sit across from CIOs of states, and you'd show them their password and they would have that, oh crap moment. And,
Yeah.
but what was interesting in all that is that when we pivoted, the MSP space was so much more aggressive with it. They conceptualized it and they understood it far greater than even enterprise, which I thought was a really interesting dynamic. It was almost like, counterintuitive, right? Because you always hear innovation and all that stuff starts at enterprise and then trickles down into mid-market and SMB. But in this case, it was.
It actually leads into what I was going to ask. Like, what did you find so special, or what was the magic from the, what we call the channel, right? But I know a lot of people define channel in a lot of different ways, right? Like the MSP IT sandbox, I like to call it, right? That community, which has various segments like any other industry, right? Like we're sub-industry of a larger one, obviously, but what was that magic sauce? Like what is so different about that group of people in this area, in this sandbox, than regular corporate America, than maybe other industries that we all have to deal with, right? I mean, what's the magic sauce? I feel like there is something there.
I think, and Matt, feel free to jump in, but I think we hit the slipstream at the right time, because even today, but cybersecurity is always been seen as this big quagmire, like just big black hole. Like, what do we do with it? I don't know how to articulate it, and you'd hear time and time again, I'm trying to sell security to my customer, but it seemed more of an expense or, an obstacle to getting stuff done. And this was finally something tangible, right? Something that's like, it's personal. It's, little Johnny, little Susie, 1, 2, 3, the password they use for everything, and I think that helped to really break down cybersecurity, to make it personal, right? I think that was a big element of it.
I mean, there was a huge element. I mean, so on the enterprise, we weren't selling them a prospecting tool. We were selling them just the ongoing service. And so it's not that they didn't see some value, but some of those conversations, truthfully, were happening before LinkedIn, Dropbox, and MySpace got breached. So the LinkedIn one really set it off, because that one had clear text passwords of like everybody, right? So real passwords. And so I think that was one of the things. But that was a big difference though with the MSPs. We were providing not only an ongoing service they could make money off of, but really, and I stand by this statement, the greatest sales tool on earth. Like I've been in sales my entire life.
Like, is this your password?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I never had something that could just generate meetings. I mean, meetings with the CIO of a Starbucks just based off of data that I had, right? So it enabled MSPs, who are not all experts in security, by the way, right? They do sell security services, but they're not all experts on it. And certainly everybody has a really hard time articulating how to communicate that to their customers, who are, and I would always say this when I was on stage, was like, I'm not very technical and I'm not even an expert on the dark web. So the way I'm explaining it to you is how you should be explaining it to your end customer, because I am your end customer. Like, that's the level of technical understanding that they're going to have typically. And so that, I think, is just what set it on fire, was that it could make it very real, because a real password just it hits an emotional thing. And then 2, it gave them the opportunity to then shift the conversation to the much broader scope of security, versus that was always our message. It's like, you're not there to sell them dark web mining, you're here to sell them your entire security stack, but this is what's going to lead it off and make it real to them.
Fair. So obviously through this entire journey, I'm going to ask one more kind of, last venture, and then we'll talk about how we, kind of cross over into this one. But there's a lot of emotion. We talked about emotion, right? This definitely, your ID agent and passwords and all that just really blow through doors. But there's a lot of emotion in selling your company too, right? I mean, if you really put a lot of time into it, and I feel like the longer somebody's put into their company, the harder it is for them to actually do something. I mean, that situation, that experience differs wildly, right? I mean, it could be what kind of company is it and who you're talking to and so on and so forth. Best advice you would give somebody who's going to say, yep, I'm building something to sell, or finally comes to the conclusion that they have something worth selling?
Oh man,
Kevin,
such a
that's
broad.
I think that goes to you first.
Yeah, it's
because it
such a
was your
broad
company.
question. Yeah, it was interesting. We had achieved so much velocity, right? And we could organically keep that velocity going. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be able to self-fund that company and the next company. But we looked at, part of the mission, right? Is how can we have meaningful impact and change this issue? And what we found is that we could achieve a significant force multiplier, going down that path with Kaseya. And we bought into the vision of a holistic security platform. At the time, most of the large platform vendors, like the Kaseyas and I think Continuum or ConnectWise had just bought Continuum, they had pockets of it, right? And some were talking security, some were not. But we saw it, one, as a force multiplier, but two, the ability to come in and create a broader platform. And that's one of the I think more rewarding things for me going through that process, is that I was able to acquire companies like Graphis. I was able to acquire companies like Rocket Cyber and start to build out a true cybersecurity portfolio across Kaseya's our existing portfolio products, and over time make that more of a meaningful platform and affordable platform for the rest of the industry. So kind of looked at it as that we could achieve that force multiplier. It can continue the mission that we were on, and ultimately lend itself to creating more good in the world, right? More security. And
so how do you make the personal decision on? And again, this leads right into the next venture, right? It's like the clock in the quarterback's head, right? Hey, I'm holding the ball too long. I need to get it out. Like, I guess everybody has a different answer to this, but like, how long? Like, you ultimately, went into the Kaseya story, right? You tried to help that larger, picture, but then you said, you know what? It's time for me to move, right? I'm going to do something different now. Like, how do you make the best decision there?
Well, I think it goes back to when you're an entrepreneur, and Fred was my first boss in 25 years, and darn good boss, but I wasn't used to having a boss, but great experience. But it got to the point where I knew that I need to start something, right? And entrepreneurs, gluttons for punishment or whatever. I mean, it's you want to go out and solve problems, and taking a step back when we were looking, kind of in the throes of the chaos and the scale and excitement of ID Agent. I had a lot of the CEOs of other companies in the channel reach out to me and say, how do you do it? How do you do it? So I started, building relationships and almost advising, quite a few of the CEOs. And I realized that we were in a very, we were in rarefied air to be able to scale that quick. And so part of me, in the back of my mind is like, there's got to be a way to help other vendors, make better decisions and scale better in the industry. But at the same time, looking at from the IT service provider roots, from Windvale, how do we create a better environment, or more environment that has a lot less friction? So as an MSP, you're bombarded with different vendors. I mean, tools after tools, and you go to a show, you get, you're on an email list and you get 100 vendors, hitting you up the next, Tuesday. Right? They'll normally let you get settled on Monday, but Tuesday is when they hit you up. And so, again, started looking at like problems that we could solve, and that it started to just take shape. And I was like, man,
you had it's like it came to you in the middle of the night and it started bubbling up. Matt, how did you, making the divide, you're crossing the line here, right? You're going from I'm working, I'm in the company, but I'm not the guy, the buck doesn't stop at my desk and I'm not signing paychecks. Now you're one of the people doing that. That's a big move for you.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I'll take you through a couple of those steps, and I'll just also give my also sort of the side of when I was at ID Agent and Kevin was making this decision to sell. Like, part of it is like from my perspective, and this was just my opinion, and I don't know whether Kevin took it into consideration or not at the time, but I think this is also important to look at in when to sell too. Is we had this incredible year and a half where we had no competition in dark web monitoring.
Wow.
And then
you're right. You're absolutely right.
So we had a blue ocean for that time, and we sprinted as fast as one could, especially being in a self-funded environment. but then other people started offering dark web monitoring. We started offering security awareness training. So you started getting into a more crowded space. And I think that was also like in my mindset, I was like, maybe we should get out while we had that time. Like we had our time frame, we killed it. And so that was at least in my mentality, and now you see, I mean, how many security awareness training tools and dark web monitoring, there's so many now, right? There's so many. So it became a much more crowded space. And then obviously, I took on a larger role at Kaseya, really, being the product evangelist and whatnot. But then I stepped out on my own and was doing consulting services. And that, let me tell you, George, I mean, that was my first step into being an entrepreneur, in reality versus just spirit.
How was the deep end there, pal?
It was tough. I mean, it was great because luckily I built a really good reputation and I immediately was able to build out revenue, but I learned a lot of lessons very quickly, and I had I think it actually gave me a lot more respect for, owners in general, but also MSPs, because I was actually I couldn't believe how many SaaS products I had to be a part of just to even run a business, not even then resell products like an MSP.
Like 30 on average.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane, on top of what an MSP then has to also do on the resale side. So it gave me like a ton more respect from that standpoint. But one of the things Kevin has always really hammered into my head is like, how do you make things scalable? And it became it's not that I didn't know consulting services aren't very scalable, but it definitely came to me pretty quickly that I was like, that this is not, I don't want to build this on my own. I don't want to build a consulting practice that's whatever a scalable consulting practice looks like, which to me ends up being you have to hire a bunch of people to also, and I just wasn't interested in that capacity. And I was just having really similar conversations as Kevin was having with emerging vendors and MSPs. And ultimately we just started having a conversation, and he was doing the same kind of conversations, and we were just like, well, there's clearly a problem. If we're both hearing the exact same thing 100 times over now between the two of us, there's an issue. And so that is, what got us coming together. And I can say this, I'm an entrepreneur in spirit. I don't know without Kevin how I would do in terms of like really running the business. This is why I think we're a great partnership, is because he's very good at running a business and running the operations. It's what he knows. And I know how I do know I have to like learn that piece of it more and more. And Kevin's forcing me to do that. But I also, play to my own strengths, which is being out there and, spreading the gospel. So we do make a great partnership, but, he does a lot of the operations, which I just don't know if I would want to be in a business where I'm the one running the operations, at least this point in my life.
I hear from both of you one thing that's coming through the screen like louder than everything: self-awareness. Right? Like you're like, no, this isn't right. I'm making a turn right here. And like you just like something in both of your heads, and you're both good at it in your own corners. Like there's a trigger, right? And you're like, yep, going this way. And then you're able to decide, nope, got to make a turn. This isn't working. And like a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah. Look, I mean, a scale of 1 to 10, when it comes to narcissism, I'm probably like a 3 and Matt's a 9. So it makes sense to put Matt out front and make, all these videos, and be the face and do all the LinkedIn stuff. But no, I kid, but yeah, look, that's the great thing about building a business, right? And, again, when you find the right problems to solve and you bring the right people together, I mean, it just works, right? It's just, it's funny, before this, 2 hours ago, I forced Matt to sit on a financial call, an operations call, and run through, AR and AP. And I could see in the video, he was like, I don't want to deal with this. I just want to get out there and sell, but it's good. It just works, right? It's great for Matt to see that side and, and have a perspective on the scale, because he wasn't exposed to a lot of that, on the ID agent side, and now he's getting fully immersed in it. So it's good.
Yeah,
it's good stuff.
real quick, because Pete actually put in a really timely question. What's the biggest challenge when you have to scale? Like it's easy when you're like a 2, 3, 4, 10 man company, 10 person company. like once you got to get to 20 and 50 and plus, I mean, it really changes everything.
And Matt, I'll let you jump in, but I think from my perspective, it's always been that the number one challenge is people, right? Especially in this environment right now where funding and investment, I mean, that's the easy part. You got a good idea. There's
The money's there.
The money's there, right? But you get to a point, where you've got 4 people, 5 people, and 6 people, and it's really tight, close knit. You get to like 10, 15, 20, 25. Like, do you still have that level of like engagement, commitment, and like passion? And that was one of the amazing things about ideation, even through scale, and we got the 50 odd people. I mean, everybody was bought into the mission. I mean, everybody from the product owner to engineering to sales, BD, administrative support. I mean, everybody was bought into why we were doing this. And I think that's honestly this go around why we've attracted such a kick butt team. And we're 10 full-time, 10 developments. We're almost 20 people right now. Right. And we're 4 months into it, 5 months into it.
That's awesome.
But everybody.
Nice to be able to have the money to start it on your own now. That's always good too.
Yeah, it's helpful and not having to answer to Big Brother and all that stuff, but it's helpful, but it's also, look, it puts more pressure on you as well, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's relative, but yeah, it's like, I got to answer to my other half, my wife, and she's like, when you're just going to start taking a paycheck. But
why are you working so many hours? Are you going to show up for dinner at any one point in time?
Well, yeah, it's like, I get the question, why are you doing this again? You don't need to go out there and do it again. But it's like, there's a problem to be solved, right? And it's fun. It's fun to get out there and solve problems. So
yeah, there's something to be said for the entrepreneur. Like, if you're not out there doing your thing, then you won't be happy ultimately, right? Like, everybody has that balancing act that they have to play, but like ultimately you wake up in the morning and you want to accomplish something. What is that, right? For somebody who's, got that spark, right? Like, like you guys now, Kevin, and Matt, I mean, you're not going to be happy sitting, waking up saying, nope, going into the office, got 3 meetings today and I'll be back for dinner.
Yeah. And I would double down obviously on what Kevin was talking about with the people, especially like in that startup. I mean, in the first phases, I mean, you have to have people you trust. I mean, they are going along this like life journey with you, and hopefully it's a once or twice in a lifetime experience. It was funny, like literally as we were on this call, I got an email from our CMO and she was making a re-edit to something. And I just responded, I was like, I'm on a live thing. I trust I trust you. So you go, you don't need so like having that capability to trust your employees that you're hiring. And also, I'll say this, and I know that not everybody would have this flexibility because it depends on cash flow and things like that. Also, knowing when to take advantage when the opportunity to hire a very good person in the space that's a well-known quantity. I'll go back. I'll get 2 versions of this really. Back to our ID agent days when Dan Tomaszewski became available. I mean,
wait a minute.
I was just having
which one?
Big Dan.
The Kaseya Dan.
Yeah, Kaseya Dan. So, when he reached out to me and we were just having a conversation, it's not like it never occurred to me that he was going to be available. Like, that wasn't on my radar. And then he just started mentioning things, and I call Kevin and we were just having conversations over the weekend. It's like we did not have a role for him in our heads. But I remember Kevin, we just had a conversation. I was like, Kevin, I cannot think of a reason other than we don't have a position right now to not hire Dan. Like, I just think we need to hire him because of the, whatever reasons. And it, ended up being one of our best strategic hires, period. And, now, you see that now we hired, Robin Miller and Caitlin, and some of these things feel like the same type of thing where you weren't always looking for certain people, but they become available and whatever. And sometimes you just gotta take that chance to hire the right people. It's kind of, I don't know. George, you're a big NFL fan. It's that question of like,
I use the draft all the time in my head, right? But hey, remember, even a first round draft pick, it's a 50-50. Like, there's no guarantee. Yeah, I mean, hey, they took Justin Jefferson and they're like, nah, we're going to get this other guy. We'll be okay. And the guy's like a phenom. in Minnesota, and the guy that
Yep.
we took before him is like, I don't know, like he needs to go
Right.
find a job somewhere else. Like it could happen.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
It happens. The percentages in the real world are much worse than 50-50.
Yeah. But it just feels like that, do you choose to draft the wide receiver because you don't have a wide receiver, or you get the tight end because
Best
the tight end
Yeah,
is the best available? Yeah.
it's fair.
So
That's fair.
yeah.
We all use the big TV production in the real life thing. So
Yeah.
so what was the messaging? You said you talked to all these people on the channel, all these executives, all these CEOs, all these business owners, and they kept on telling you the same thing was happening. The same message was happening. What was the message? What were they complaining about? What was the problem?
So,
Go ahead, Matt.
I mean, and they were a similar message, but I'll speak the one that I heard the most when I'm talking on the vendor side first. On the vendor side, it was really emerging vendors. How do I get into the space? How do I create a name and brand without having to spend a fortune, right? And I know, George, I know your feelings on in-person events and costs. And it stems from that, right? I mean, we've seen, even when ID Agent was killing it, and we, time year after year, these prices kept going up, and we were just getting to the point where, like, oh my God, like, right. So, there's the standard group of vendors who can afford the main stage. But we annihilated our competition because we had main stage speaking versus a booth. We really did, and it made a huge difference. And so we were just like, there's got to be other ways to do this other than just the in-person events. And again, I'm a big proponent of in-person events. I don't think they're like, you should replace that. But certainly we've all learned with COVID, it cannot be the only piece of your playbook.
Agreed.
Right. Agreed. And so what we were like is, how do you at least level the playing field somewhat? Let MSPs actually hear from some of these emerging vendors that they may not get to see because they're not at these events, or they're not, they're just one of many booths. And we all think all these MSPs are at every event. The truth is they're not. I mean, I remember seeing a report, this is pre-COVID, that like 60% of the industry doesn't actually goes to one or less events per year, but we see the same people.
I think that number's low.
Yeah. I mean, but we see the same people over and over. So it always feels like, oh, I know everybody that goes, and so there's also these MSP owners who are just not attending these events. And so they're not necessarily having these conversations, and certainly not on their own time per se, because they're getting bombarded or whatever. So that was really, I would say, the biggest thing on the vendor side was, how do I, as an emerging vendor, how can I make an imprint without $1 million event budget? And Kevin, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit on the vendor side. That was, again, one of the interesting things about being at Kaseya, and running corporate development. I got to sit with a ton of amazing technologies. Some were really, really early stage, and they were looking to, piggyback on the Kaseya name and kind of the distribution model, because they could achieve scale a lot faster. And without it, they're names that they no longer exist for some of them, and they are really amazing technologies. And to Matt's point, the industry is it's outpriced, the emerging vendor, right? What it takes to enter the marketplace right now, it takes $2-3 million over 2 years just to crack the code, right, and begin to scale. And that's significant to a lot of early stage technologies. And it's, I come from, small business and looking for early stage and scaling, a technology vendor. And if we didn't have a couple of the lucky breaks, again, there's no way that we would have gotten there. And for every one of ID agents that are out there, there are 1,000 emerging vendors that aren't going to achieve that level of scale. So part of it was like, how do we create something that, we've used these big words like democratize and revolutionize. How do we create something that is not a standard webinar, right? And everyone's kind of getting tired of those. And how do we make it meaningful for the MSPs? And so we spent a lot of time thinking about the user experience and the, what's in it for the MSP moving forward. And
so what's the answer to that? What is in it for? I get the value proposition to the emerging vendor, and everything you said, by the way, 100% agree. I'm not sure, just because, I'm going to not name a specific event, but just big picture, right? if you're going to spend $30,000 for a smaller than 6 foot table, right? You didn't put anybody on a plane. You didn't give away any prizes. You didn't, buy somebody a drink at the bar, Rob Ray edition. Like, that's just to be there.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's a lot of money.
To be one of 100 vendors.
And that's the lowest option.
Yeah.
In some cases, you want to speak on the main stage, you might be talking 60, 80, $100,000.
Yeah. Yeah. We'd see that play out time and time again, right? You'd have these amazing technologies in one category, but they're never going to be up on the main stage, and
they're in the they're next to the bathroom. That's where they're at. Yeah,
so
next to the popcorn stand.
Exactly.
So we get that. What's the MSP's benefit?
Right. So Matt was saying, right, vast majority of the industry is not able or does not go to events. And we're talking about, the business owner, maybe the sales and marketing individual. That number is probably close to 99% when it comes to the technician, right?
Okay.
Because technicians normally, they don't travel, right? But, the technicians are often the ones that, they're the ones solving the problems, right? They're the ones in the front line, and they're the ones that you probably want, to some degree, looking for the technologies that are going to make your organization that much more efficient. So the first concept was, how do we marry the two? How do we take the vendors and give that kind of equal playing, time? And then how do we create an environment that's safe, right? That the MSP, the individual MSP, is not going to get bombarded if they join and watch a session. So we created these 7-minute pitch sessions. We had 8 companies on the first pitch in December. And our message at the industry is that you join anonymously, right? You join and you decide whether you want to engage, and you don't have to engage with all of them. You can engage with one of them. What was great about it is that, the folks that were on, they engaged with 4 or 5. I think the average was 4 different vendors, because we told the vendors, look, it's 7 minutes. Don't tell me about what color the button is. Don't tell me how great your team is. Tell me what problem you solve, how you solve it. How am I going to make money? How am I going to be more efficient? How am I going to better secure my customers, right? And then how are you going to help me do it? What is your channel program? And so as we've worked with these vendors, we said, that's what an MSP wants to hear. There's a time and a place for all of what color is the button and the integrations and, all that stuff, but, cut to the chase. And so we've created a model where the MSPs get in, right? And they can be anonymous. They can watch these, they provide their feedback, and they feel like, look, I'm actually having an impact on the industry, because I'm saying, this is a good technology. This company might be in a very saturated marketplace, so they may not want to go down the path of being in the channel, or they may want to rethink their value proposition. So part of this is we're giving the voice back to the MSP in a very safe environment. And so far, their interaction and their response has been phenomenal. And so I think,
Oh no, I was going to add, because product advisory councils is another way to really build a relationship with a vendor. And again, this goes back to this feeling that, at least the conversations I have had with MSPs who really feel left out of some of this stuff, especially with all the companies that they, partner with that are getting acquired and whatnot. The advisory councils give access to better discounts, better relationships, things like that. And if you look time and time again, it's the same MSPs that are featured on product advisory councils, that are featured on panels. So for giving them the ability to actually volunteer and say to whatever vendor, so we have SpearTip coming up in one of them, to say to SpearTip, hey, I'd actually be interested in talking on your advisory council, giving them that opportunity that they may not get currently with a lot of the vendors, because there's just a lot of retread that goes on in the industry. So part of that value prop is to that, to try to give more voice to the MSPs and give more opportunities to other MSPs in our industry to really get to know the vendors. Because George, you play both sides. People, we're human. If you have relationships with your vendors, things get done fast. It just, those relationships matter.
It's true. But the problem is, a lot of the times it's either the squeaky wheel, is the one that's paid attention to, which if some people just don't even have the energy to figure out where to go make that wheel squeak. And then on the other side, it's, hey, I've done enough revenue that now I'm being viewed as a strategic, account, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're not one of those two things, you're just another guy in the wheel, cog in the wheel, right? I mean, you're another just partner account. And you all know, like, the larger the company, the harder it is to get to somebody who's, got the pool and has the power to do something different, right? Like the guy who I would call managing my account at any vendor, like, he's not very high in the totem pole, right? Right. Like, he has a manager, his manager has a manager. Like, if there's a problem, I got to go through a lot of layers to get some sort of resolution or help. Maybe I'm working on a project or a deal and I need some sort of special situation. And, like, it's not available to me unless I have access to, the people that you're talking about. So very interesting, right? Your pitch to the MSP is, hey, you can give, kind of anonymous feedback. You can engage when you want. You don't have to engage if you don't want, but you do have the ability to actually get to what, I mean, I assume the people coming on, who are giving these rapid pitches, and then I guess you do breakout sessions afterwards, whatever.
Yep.
Like, they're actually executive level people in a lot of these cases.
Quite a few. Yeah. I mean, on the first one, I think 6 out of the 8 were the actual CEOs of the company. So yeah, it was unique, particularly last month, where the CEOs were in those breakout rooms, being able to have those conversations. And so yeah, that also is a unique component to bring all these executives together.
Yeah. How
I'd
often
also,
are you talking to the CEO of anybody? I mean,
yeah,
unless they're the only person in the company.
Right.
yeah. But I
Yeah.
also think, like, if there is a vendor listening, I do think they'd be making a mistake to only focus on their highest revenue generating partners and things like that. You got to think about the demographics of the industry in general. And, like, again, thinking back to the ID agent days, a big part of our business, maybe not by one MSP, but a big part of our business was one-man MSPs who were using our product as a sales tool. And so, yeah, you might not have looked at them as like, oh my God, they're our biggest revenue generator, this single MSP, but that single MSP represents hundreds and thousands of other MSPs that are made up of the 5-man shows. And so their voices, to me, is equally as important. But I do think vendors overlook that element and they just look at the revenue. But you really need to look at the demographics of your partner base and think about that voice. We need to hear that voice, because 80% of the industry is less than $1 million in revenue, or whatever the stat is, So I think that's pretty critical.
To Matt's point, and your point, that's the second artificial barrier that is created in this industry, right? So the communication between MSP and their vendors, in most cases, and probably 90% of your vendors, it's non-existent, right? You may get an email from them from their PRM, which may have a 5% deliverability rate. I mean, just the whole communication. When if I'm an MSP, right, I want to make sure that I have a relationship or a voice or a lifeline or something, access to who I'm paying. And that just, the way it's set up today, it just doesn't work. And that's why there's so much noise out on Reddit, on Discord, on Facebook. And that's why it turns ugly, right? And so there may be some other reasons why that happens, but part of it is that how do we create something that smooths those edges, right? Makes that process of engagement that much more easy and more effective. And that's part of what we'll be launching over the next 2 months is an add-on to this platform that makes that interaction between vendor and MSP just that much more seamless. And we invested at ID Agent and elsewhere into these PRMs and found it's not effective, right? It's not effective to just send emails to your partners and hope they got the message,
I just wanted to give a specific example because, George, we would come out with a new product or have new updates, and we would be so proud of it because we actually listened to our partners. We fixed the problem that they had. We put it out there. I said it on social media. I put it on, we sent out emails, and 20% of your current customers, 30% if you're really lucky, saw the message, right? Yeah. And so that means, God, that's 70, 80% of your own customers don't even know the problem. And what I would find was I'd go onto a Facebook group and see somebody complaining about, oh, this problem, that we're like the ID agent was having, and be like, we fixed that 2 months ago. And so there's just such an awareness issue and communication issue between vendors and MSPs.
There's clearly a complete disconnect on the level. It's very interesting though, when you go into those Reddits, those Facebooks, those Discords, those Slacks, whatever, they're like, I really don't want to hear from my vendor until I need to get them, and then they better pick up my call right away. And it's like, it's not really a relationship. That's the customer service counter at Walmart. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't get you where you're trying to go.
Yeah, but that's hard to do at any relative scale, right? I mean, it's small, maybe having a couple dozen, maybe 100 partners. You can foster that, maybe even up to 400 or 500 partners. But then you get a point where you get above 500 partners, you're like, well, how many hours in a day and how many more people? And so that's always for the vendors that are at scale, the big organizations. It's always going to be a challenge. But if we keep doing, those vendors keep doing the same thing, and slightly iterating on how they do it, this problem is going to continue to fester. It's going to continue to be out there. And again, you're not going to do away with the ones that just want to have a voice and complain out on Reddit. But if we can change the dynamic and we can change how people engage, and that's part of this mission, right? Is to change how vendors and MSP relationships interact. Then that's the mission that we're on. That's what we want to help solve.
So the pitch is, I mean, we've been talking about this the whole time. That's the anonymous program that gives both sides the ability to interact in a new way. That happens, I think, monthly, right? So I think the next one's coming up tomorrow.
Good timing.
There you go. So if you want to just check this out, right? Like if nothing other, it's new. You haven't seen this before. Hit channelprogram.com and then you can sign up, and then like anonymous, nobody's going to spam you unless you want to interact, right? So, but pain-free, email inbox free. I know Darren on here just sent me an email from a vendor earlier today, and I was like, no, they're as bad as XYZ. I was like, can it be? No. So it's okay. You can sign up and be okay. But this is interesting. This other thing I noticed, channel cache. What is that?
So it's still in its infancy. Now that we have Caitlin on board, she'll really be heading up that program. But it's an investment from channel program back into the MSP community. One of the conversations that certainly came up a lot over the years and was, well, one, we always got asked at IT Agent whether we had an MDF program, and it's not easy to have an MDF program unless you're a much larger organization than we were. And so that was something that came up a lot when we were a vendor.
But how much MDF goes unused every year? You get that survey, and it's like 80%.
Well, that was part of this, was that the reason MDF doesn't get used is often because it's the amount of hoops that the MSP has to go through, and it's also not exact. It doesn't fit their sales model, right? Because they're not selling one product; they're selling their entire stack. And so when they take money from a specific vendor, they obviously have to use that as the cornerstone of an event. And each vendor has different forms they have to fill out, some more cumbersome than others. And so we were like, how could we make a dent in this and really get MSPs an ability to use MDF without all the hoops? And so what we came out with was a program that's basically a vendor agnostic or vendor independent, however you want to call it, MDF program.
So you're funding this yourself?
We're funding it ourselves.
Like out of your own bank account?
Yes. And what our big ask is, you come to a channel pitch event once per quarter and provide your influence. Listen to the vendors, give your influence back. We don't think it's a major ask, once a quarter to attend an hour and a half event. Also, you're going to benefit from that event hopefully as well. And the form we're asking them to fill out is minimal. We're going to try to keep it under 5 minutes. We're not asking for ROI reports. We of course want them to have success. We want to hear success stories, but they don't have to tell it. We don't need the leads, because we don't care what they sell at the end of the day, right?
So, but how many people, okay, so let's say this thing really takes off and 1,000 people per quarter show up to your thing, which it could be more, 5,000, 10,000, whatever, hopefully 1 million. Mm-hmm. That you don't have an unlimited pool of MDF cash.
No, there'll be certain prizes we give out. Some will be lottery system. Some will be like for the larger prizes will likely be a reviewed process. So the MSPs who are a little bit more creative with their ideas kind of, they win the larger prize because they came out with kind of an interesting idea. But the idea is to try to spread as much wealth around different MSPs as we can. Because I mean, so, we'll have a grand prize of $5,000, but $250 to a small MSP could mean a lot, and we're not too critical on what there is, as long as it's used towards a marketing activity that you could be somebody to call, you could spend $10 an hour having somebody make phone calls for you. We sort of don't care as long as it's an activity being used, for a marketing initiative and an event, webinar, anything like that.
So it sounds like the ask is spend an hour, hour and a half per quarter, which I don't think is a huge ask, right? I mean, there's a lot, a lot of other things that you're spending your time on, you're probably not getting any reward back for. Spend an hour and a half a quarter. So over the course of a year, you're talking about, 4 to 6 hours, right? And are you automatically in this MDF, or you still got to raise your hand? You got to fill out the form first.
Yeah, I mean, so you would be eligible, and then you'd have to fill out a small form. And we are, we're tinkering with some different ways to increase your chances. If you have more people, for example, if you have 10 people in your organization and all 10 of them attend, we're going to give you an increased chance of winning the prize. I mean, that there's obviously two sides to what we're trying to do, but we're trying to build our community, but we also want to invest back in them for making the effort to be part of it.
That's awesome. That's a great idea.
This is essentially our marketing budget, right? And
I was just putting this together. I'm like, I get it now. I understand what's happening.
Yeah, and again, the message is that if you choose to be anonymous, you will absolutely always 100% be anonymous on this platform, right? If you want to engage again, that's up to you, and that have no impact on you being a part of Channel Cash. We just want you to engage, and part of this is giving these vendors really frank feedback, and that was the greatest thing to validate the idea in that first pitch, and having hundreds of MSPs give feedback and score and rate these vendors. It was great. And eventually over time, over the course of a year, we'll be able to say, this is what the industry is looking for. We'll be able to, better coach these.
So there's an aggregation of data that's occurring over time that you're going to be able to turn around and say, by the way, we talk to hundreds or thousands of MSPs, and this is actually what they are looking for. This is what they're willing to spend their dollars and their time on versus you just guessing.
Yeah. So if you're going to enter this marketplace, you better listen to what the MSPs, are going to want. And I think I wrote an article like 2 or 3 weeks ago about, 2022 being the year of minimum viable enablement. And so I think this is our way of going back to the vendor community and say, look, you got to step up, right? We know anecdotally and from experience what MSPs want, right? We know how they want to be supported. And so we can justify that over the year of the feedback and say, look, yeah, this is exactly what the industry wants. This is how they want it. They want their pricing. This is how they want you to train them. This is how they want you to provide materials. And so, if the mentality is that the MSP is going to partner up with you, right? You should be going to the nines with materials and the ability to support and seamlessly communicate with them. And that's the ecosystem that we're building.
Awesome. No, listen, it's a new idea. This is literally tomorrow. What time tomorrow? Is it 11 o'clock?
11 o'clock Eastern. Yep.
Okay. Tomorrow is the second one you've ever done.
Second one we've ever done.
Obviously, they'll get better over time, right? Like you'll tweak.
Yeah, we believe. Yeah, we are, and we have 400 or 500 right now. 500 exactly. 541 people who've registered for the event, and that's going to continue to grow over the next 24 hours. So we encourage everybody to join. Vendor, MSP, whoever.
Channelprogram.com.
Yeah.
You got literally, it's an hour. Like if you can't do the whole thing, stick in there for the 7-minute. How do you get a pitch done in 7 minutes, by the way?
Because we're
it's gotta slim that down, guys.
Right, but that's the point, is that and that's something when I've talked to MSP owners that were like, this is fantastic because I can learn what I need to learn in the 7-minute environment, and you can watch the pitches later as well. But the idea is to just get down to the bare bones of what an MSP is going to care the most about, and do it in a 7-minute format. Cut out all the fluff. your
How did you get to 7 minutes, by the way? Why not 10, not 8?
Because
Like,
10 takes too long. 10, if you think 10 times 8, you start doing the math and you think about
Okay.
what's a reasonable ask for the audience to attend. And we think 7 minutes, we think we started with 5. I was like, that's a little low. Then we, 10 felt too much and 7 felt right in the space. And it, at least for the first one, went swimmingly well. Like everybody like hit that time and it went.
I'm sure you have the buzzer ready.
We do.
Yeah, Kevin's the official chimer with his phone.
Yeah, I got a little buzzer on my phone. We give them the hook, but no, with every one of these vendors, we take them through. We have a PowerPoint that we walk them through. It's the most generic PowerPoint, but it's 7 slides. It's literally 7 slides. And if you can't get your message in these 7 slides, then you as a vendor need to go back and you need to think about what you're doing, because again, these are 7 presentations and there's no competition, on each pitch. But can you think about going out into the wild and have, what the MSP has to deal with when they walk that trade show floor?
You got 7 minutes with that bar, with that beer at the bar to get your message out.
That's right.
And George,
Right.
you'll appreciate this because you're a wrestling fan, and I still got to send this to Colin Knox. But this is the best pitch from Gradient last month. They
Very
did
nice.
a championship belt. So
I love it.
So the stakes are high.
I love it. Like he better do some good social media photos at that belt.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
Oh yeah. But at some point there may be a celebrity match. How about that?
Yeah, there you go.
That would be awesome.
Hey, I'm down. Let's set it up. Talk about in person versus virtual, but we'll stream it. Guys, it was really a pleasure. We're gonna send this out into the universe here. I really like what you're doing. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I don't think a lot of people understood what you were building. But like this entire session was no. Like this is how we got here, right? Like you didn't just wake up overnight and say, let's do this because it hasn't been done. No, there's an actual problem, and we're trying to actually bridge the divide, right, between the both sides, right? So I like it. I'm gonna be there 11 o'clock tomorrow Eastern time. You should be there. Sign up at channelprogram.com. Costs you nothing, and you won't get spammed unless you want to talk to somebody. What do you got to lose?
Exactly. Thank you, George.
Awesome. Thanks everyone, and we'll catch you on the flip side.
Thank you.
All right.